The Antimicrobial Hypothesis, Department of Psychology, California State University, Fresno, Professor Michael Botwin. Have you ever wondered why some people like spicy foods and others don't? Some individuals have constitutions that tolerate very spicy foods. Others of us have trouble with even a little bit too much salt and pepper. In this video lecture, we're going to talk about something called the antimicrobial hypothesis. And it explains why we spice our food, but it does it at the level of different cultures. And one of the things that you may be interested in, like I am, is ethnic foods. I love food from different cultures. My extreme weakness is Asian food. If, according to my wife, if you were to ask her, I would have Chinese food one day, Thai food the next, sushi the third, and on and on. They're all different to me, but I love the Asian and the Asian spicy food like Szechuan. Now, it turns out that our food preferences are also guided by where we were born. And that also has to do with our culture. Now, when I first started eating Chinese food, and especially Szechuan food, I remember liking it but having tears roll out of my eyes with an especially hot Szechuan dish. So I wasn't really used to it in my Midwestern diet, but I've become accustomed to it. Other people are raised with it, and here might be one of the really good reasons. So let's explore the antimicrobial hypothesis. The antimicrobial hypothesis is one explanation as to why we use spices. And simply put, some spices kill or inhibit the growth of microorganisms and present the production of toxins in our food. None of us want bacteria-laden meat. And it turns out that many spices kill these microorganisms. In fact, many spices, while on the plant, are toxic to insects and other types of critters in the spices environment. So they do good for the plant and they do good for us too. Here are some spices that may in turn inhibit the growth of bacteria and microorganisms. You see a variety of chilies, cayenne, paprika, and some spices used in Indian cooking, garam masala, and ajwain, and I can't pronounce the other one, but they're pretty looking. Here is a picture of a spice market in Istanbul, Turkey. Doesn't it look fantastic? Very, very colorful. It just always blows my mind looking at that picture. The vast array of spices. Well, let me get you hungry here by showing you some foods. And the antimicrobial hypothesis basically says the closer culture lives to the equator, the spicier the foods are going to be, because there's a greater need to prevent spoilage and toxins. So, near the equator, spicy foods. Far from the equator, blander foods where you don't have the requirement to prevent microorganisms from contaminating your food. So look at this lovely dish. Indian curry from the Asian country, India, right? That just looks great. Southern Italy. Now, Southern Italy has a very different cuisine than Northern Italy. Here we have orchetta with garlic-infused olive oil, spicy Italian sausage, roasted peppers, and spinach. Many of my favorite things. One day I will try this recipe and report back to you as to whether it's any good. Well, my mouth waters in multiple ways for Thai spicy basil, especially with those lovely shrimp in there. Look at how colorful this is. Now, growing up in Michigan, I liked salsa from a jar. Since living in Fresno, I would never eat salsa from a jar. Now, this technically isn't salsa, it's pico de gallo. The picture is much brighter than a bowl of salsa, but it is a spicy Mexican thing, something I've gotten used to in my 30 years now in Fresno. We all know Texas chili has a reputation for being very spicy. But let's move away from the equator. Here is Brazilian churrasco. And it is an interesting dining experience if you can ever go to a churrasco restaurant. They bring around different kinds of meats on swords, and then they have a little fork and they pull that off for you, and it's kind of all you can eat. Now they also offer you other garnishes and things like that, but the star is the meat, and it's pretty much just plain roasted meat. Now, to accommodate a variety of palates, oftentimes Brazilian churrasco will have some spicy things on it. But generally, it's just good plain roasted meat. Go farther north, well, Brazil was south, further north, and you get Swedish meatballs. This is a picture shamelessly stolen from IKEA and their restaurant, but who doesn't love the IKEA meatballs served with a little bit of jam and some potatoes? Not the spiciest dish in the world, but good. Now there's a stereotype that Asian cuisine can be on the spicy side, but Mongolia is pretty far north, and here is a traditional Mongolian dish. You can see it's a roasted piece of meat with some root vegetables and a dipping sauce. It's pretty cold in Mongolia. You don't need the spices. One more example, something that after seeing all these other lovely dishes might gross you out. Of course, if you have an English background, you might not be grossed out by bangers and mash, which is pretty much a dish that's named after its content. It has a mystery white sausage with some caramelized onions over mashed potatoes and canned gravy. Once I dissed this dish in lecture, and I had a student whose wife was from England, and I really heard about it, that it's really truly a delicacy, but I'll take my spicy Thai food any day. And Sherman and Billings did an interesting study where they examined differences in spices and the mean temperature in a region. Spices used in the recipes were coded by type of spice and the preservative characteristics of those spices. They also make the point that they did not use vegetarian recipes because vegetarian recipes generally are spiced differently, and the preservative quality of those spices are relatively irrelevant to preserving the dish or keeping it safe. What they did was they found relationships between a series of variables and the mean annual temperature of the recipe's origin. The amount of spices used in these recipes was important. So if we look at the first chart up here, we see a nice scatter here. All these represent fairly strong linear relationships between the proportion of recipes studied and the number of spices used. You see that's a pretty strong relationship. Second, spices per recipe. And it's really easy to see that the hotter the mean temperature, the more spices used in the recipe. And then finally, total spices used. A little bit less of a scatter, but still a general direction here. In a second set of analyses, Sherman and Billings found relationships between chilies, garlic, and onions and the mean temperature of the region. Let's look at these things here. Chilies, you can see a fairly linear and strong relationship between chilies and the average temp for an area. Garlic shows a similar, not quite as strong pattern, but a pretty strong linear pattern between temperature in an area and amount of garlic used in a recipe. And finally, onions. And you see you have a similar relationship. To me, a dish is pretty good if it has chilies, garlics, and onion in them. Well, I'll end by giving you a big bon appetit, and I hope you go out and get something that you really enjoy eating, spicy or not. We'll see you next time. Bye now. This has been a We Have Couches video production. Copyright 2020. Professor Michael Botwin. All rights reserved.